Good morning. Subject of today's discussion is case studies. Before we take it up, I'd like to go back to what we discussed yesterday, civil service values. One of the important values is empathy. Empathy for the citizens, the common man. Keeping that in view, we have circulated an article published in the Statesman, a PhD for a peon. This was written by a distinguished columnist who is not a journalist in the sense, he was a professor of mathematics in Netherlands. I always like such minds applying their minds to social problems. What he has brought out is a serious problem of unemployment in India, especially among the educated people. And the growth model that we have adopted generates output, profit, but not jobs. Jobs for which people are being trained in various institutions. Therefore, when you work anywhere, your job may be anything, you must bear in mind that one of the outcomes of your work should be generation of employment opportunities. That should be kept in mind. A technocratic approach oriented only to profits, efficiency, or whatever is not really relevant so much in the Indian context. That was the reason why I suggest that you go through that. It will also give you some important statistics about employment in India. You may also like to see the employment situation in other countries, especially Asian countries, ASEAN in particular, because they have advanced to a somewhat higher level of development and are faced with similar problems. Second thing that I mentioned is that every civil servant, as Parkinson said, reaches his level of incompetence. It applies to everyone. I have seen very good ministers in their own departments, but once they are elevated to chief minister's post, they fumble. They are unequal to the task. So therefore, a civil servant should have the objective of, reaching that level as late as possible or as high level as possible. That requires a conscious mental effort. And I suggested that one way to achieve it was to cultivate core competency, in a certain area. Your job may be varied, but you must try to concentrate. And not really with a preconceived notion, but as you move on, you might like certain work, a certain field of work, very interesting, attractive, from intellectual point of view, from your own satisfaction. So you try to sort of specialize, develop what is called, I really don't know what it means, domain knowledge, okay? I would like to just tell you about two very eminent civil servants and how they develop core competence. I mentioned about Sir C.P. Srivastava. I'd like to mention two more names. I wonder if any of you heard about Sir Benegal Narsingh Rao. You know about him? Sir Benegal Narsingh Rao. He was the constitutional advisor to the government of India. He didn't take any salary. He just received a token payment of 1 rupee per month after retirement and played a very great role in drafting of our constitution under guidance of Dr. Ambedkar, of course. Who was Sir Benegal Narsingh Rao? Sir Benegal Narsingh Rao was educated in Madras and later at Cambridge after he got into ICS in the year 1910. He was allotted to Bengal cadre. He was Law Secretary of Government of Assam at one point of time, and when I joined service in the 60s, he was still remembered. His work as Law Secretary. Throughout his life, he developed a remarkable capacity to draft laws. You see? And look at the level he reached. Sir Benegal Narsingh Rao was appointed in 1938 as a judge of Calcutta High Court. In those days, ICS officers were also appointed as judges of the High Court. Then, after 1938, he moved abroad, and his knowledge of, Constitution was internationally recognized. He was for some time the president of the United Nations Security Council, the first Indian to hold the chairmanship. And he also helped drafting of several constitutions of several countries of the world, including Burma. In fact, the first constitution he drafted was the Constitution of Burma in 1947. Then he moved to India. And after he finished his job, he was elected to be a judge of the International Court of Justice at The Hague. So look at the heights he reached. The second case I'd like to refer to is that of Dr. B.R. Sen, a distinguished member of the Indian Civil Service, who was Union's Agriculture Secretary in Delhi around 1950. It so happened that he was transferred from this post, and he called on the Prime Minister. His predicament was rather difficult. He was not getting a posting immediately. So the Prime Minister consulted the Foreign Secretary, Secretary General. He was an institution by himself, Sir Girija Shankar Bajpai, a very distinguished name in the Indian Foreign Service. So the Prime Minister told Mr. Sen that, you see, there is a post of ambassador at Rome. Would you like to go? He didn't have many years of service left, 2-3 years or so. He said, okay. He went there. Soon after, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution expressing their deep concern about the growing food shortage in India, in the world, and the gap between demand for food and the actual availability of food. Also, the fact that technology for raising crop production was not being disseminated appropriately, that research in agriculture was not being promoted. Research in horticulture, agriculture, animal husbandry, dairy farming, poultry was lacking, and moreover, there's a huge gap between the knowledge that has been already developed and its dissemination on the ground. And also, it took into account the administrative and resource constraints of the newly developed, newly emerging independent countries of Asia, Africa. So United Nations convened a conference at Rome to discuss on this issue. India received this letter rather late, and therefore asked the ambassador to represent India. I heard this story from Mr. Vishnu Sahai, a very distinguished member of the ICS, who was our governor of Assam, when we called on him as IAS probationers, to sort of pay our respects to him and to receive his advice and guidance. So he narrated this story, and it stuck in my mind. So he said that since India could not send anyone, and government thought that because Sen was already Secretary General, and therefore he was already a secretary, so he would be in the best position to speak. And as Mr. Vishnu Sahai put it, that you see, it was a meeting hurriedly called, so not many countries sent their very experienced or prominent people. So our ambassador proved to be the most able spokesman. So a resolution was passed to set up what came to be known now United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. Soon enough, a second meeting was convened at Rome, and the government of Italy was keen to host this organization because Italy was passing through a severe economic crisis just after the war. So in that meeting, it was unanimously decided that India's ambassador would be the Director General of the newly created organization, United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. Dr. B.S. Sen held this post for the next 20 years. It is a matter of luck, but at the same time, because he did his PhD in agricultural economics, took a lot of interest throughout his career in agriculture and related sectors, rural development. So he could get this particular assignment. He might not have got it, but there is a thing called luck. And as I said in the beginning, God's blessings. So therefore, developing core competence should be one of the major objectives of any civil servant. The second, for those who have just joined, I would like to just inform you that we discussed the career profile of Sir Benigal Narsingh Rao. You know about him? Any of you? No. Sir Benigal Narsingh Rao was the constitutional advisor to the government of India. He got a salary of 1 rupee per month because he had retired from the time. And he was essentially responsible for drafting of the Indian Constitution. If you go through Indian constitutional history, you find Sir Benigal's name written there. And throughout his life, he developed a core competence in law, drafting of laws. And he became a judge of Calcutta High Court in 1938. He drafted the Constitution of Burma and several other countries. He was for some time India's representative in the United Nations, permanent representative, and chaired some of the vital sessions of the United Nations Security Council. One of the decisions that Security Council took under his chairmanship was to provide military support to the Korean government that led to Korean War. But more importantly, after he completed his work of drafting, assisting Dr. Ambedkar in making of the Constitution, he was elected as a judge of the International Court of Justice at The Hague. And as a jurist, he attained eminence, and his reputation was all over the world. Coming back to the case of Dr. Sen, that after 20 years, and when I visited Rome at the FAO in the 70s, people still remember as the architect of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. So the point I was trying to emphasize is the need for developing some kind of a core competence. The other material which I believe has been circulated is an essay by one of my friends. Did you circulate that? Okay. Islam and American Discontents. This is an article written by a friend of mine who went to study at Oxford, Dr. Premen Ardi, in the 60s, early 60s, and then joined the faculty in Oxford, remained there for half a century, and he's back now to his home in Calcutta. This article I found is extremely fascinating for your general studies, as it deals with the problem of political Islam. See, what is happening in Syria, IAS, the intellectual basis of that movement, Why is radical Islam emerging in the 21st century? And who is responsible for emergence of radical Islam? What has been the Western policy in the Middle East? These are issues which have to be seen from an Indian perspective and also from a larger perspective. Because in this globalized world, whatever happens in Syria or Lebanon or Iran will have a direct bearing on our vital interests. So I suggest you go through it. And if you feel like pursuing this subject a little bit, I would suggest another book written by a young, brilliant Indian by the name Pankaj Mishra. You know about him, any of you? Pankaj Mishra is an independent researcher and widely respected, not in India but abroad, all over, for his skill in analyzing the current events in Asia. He has written a book, From the Ruins of the Empire. From the Ruins of the Empire. He has received many awards, but above all, he is now regarded as one of the very competent essayists covering wide variety of subjects. It might be useful for you to just go through one of his articles that have been published recently in the Times Literary Supplement, TLS. So that completes the introductory part. Let's come to case studies. How do you proceed? I'll give an introduction. Thereafter, you have two options. One is you could ask questions based on whatever you might have seen in the question papers. I have also been given by Amit some kind of a questionnaire and copies of question papers, which were sent by the UPSC last year. So I begin with some introduction, some basic kind of an approach to deal with this subject. See, the objects of case studies are to test the candidate's understanding of basic concepts and principles of public duty and service and probity, ethics and value system, and core values of the civil service. That is, we will see whether the candidate has formed some kind of definite perceptions, not unclear, incoherent, but some clear ideas, clear perceptions about what these words really mean as far as civil service is concerned. And the core values of the civil service are same everywhere, It is integrity, personal as well as intellectual. The intellectual integrity is extremely important. In fact, I find at times difficult to say which is more important. I give you a small example. You are dealing with a sensitive area. There are certain groups fighting. Suppose you take a view partial to one major group, because that major group happens to be politically important. This is a case of lack of intellectual integrity. Because while doing so, you might have suppressed some vital facts, which would have led to a different judgment. Or you might have ignored certain vital considerations. And giving lower priority or ignoring those facts might mean denial of rights to certain groups. That is very important. Denial of rights guaranteed under the Constitution. When you talk about rights, it's not abstract rights. These are rights guaranteed under the Constitution. So as a civil servant, you are duty bound to analyze a matter and suggest a course of action which is in conformity with the Constitution and the values enshrined in the Constitution. So intellectual integrity is extremely important. professional competence, we have discussed, and knowledge to make rational and ethical choice. Now, there is a relationship between professional competence and the capacity to make the choice. Higher the professional capacity, greater is your capacity to make the choice. If the professional knowledge is less, one is likely to be guided by others. So you become something like an unguided missile. You see, an unguided missile is a problem everywhere, in any system. So you must be a person in command of the situation, okay? Now, therefore, there are certain hypothetical situations, usually projected in a question paper, basically to test your capacity and quality of judgment. Now, these are the ingredients of what you call leadership capacity, leadership quality. And leadership quality is an essential requirement of persons who will be joining the higher ranks of the civil service. Leadership quality is most important, and that is what is going to be judged, not only in this written examination, but more particularly in the personality test. We'll see whether the person concerned, candidate, has the capacity to think. This is the most important quality. Rote learning is not, and it is very easy to find out whether the person concerned is producing only a kind of a, what you call, derived knowledge, you know, and not his own opinion. So this is one thing. Second quality is articulation, which is to be seen also the way you answer these papers. Third capacity is your sense of values, your value system, because value systems really generate your response. To deal with the first issue, you see, of public service, public duty, etc., it is essential to find out that their commonality and interrelationship. It has been wrongly spelled here, communality, no way. It is commonality, commonality and interrelationship. Say, between public service and public duty, there is a relationship. You see, in the sense that public service demands a certain level of efficiency in the discharge of public duty. Okay? So, you cannot have a situation of a high quality delivery of public service and a rather low level of commitment to the concept of public duty. So these two are interrelated. So therefore, there's an interesting point here. While effective public service in health, education, prevention of breach of peace, or essential supplies is visible and even measurable, nature of public duty implicit therein as performed by the civil servants in the world is unseen, while its shortfall or deficiency is quickly noted. You see, the policeman may be preventing many cases of attempted sabotage or this or that by, you know, elements hostile to our country. This will not be reported, and these are not to be reported, because reporting such incidents might jeopardize the security interests of the country. They are not to be talked about. Therefore, a civil servant, basically, as one of my senior mentioned before the Public Accounts Committee, he used a cricket analogy. He said, we are like wicket keepers who are usually judged for the catches we missed, but not the runs we stopped. So this basically is a problem of the civil service, that your deficiencies, your shortfalls, your failures would be highlighted. And yes, achievements are also highlighted, but somehow the deficiencies get, you know, more highlighted. We come to, therefore, a conclusion that while answering these questions, you have to keep at the back of your mind whatever we have discussed so far, which I attempted to sum up just now. One thing that must be highlighted again and again, the civil service value systems are integrated, which would not allow adoption of some values and ignoring the other values. See, it is an integrated concept. In other words, a person can be very honest, efficient, but if he is communal minded, it is like a bit of salt put into a glass of milk. Milk may be fine, but this aspect, if he is communal minded, if he is sectarian, in that case, the achievements that he might have made would be greatly neutralized. So therefore, one must understand the integrated nature of these value systems while answering this question. Administrative decisions in all matters affecting general public or even an individual case would require application of qualities such as impartiality, integrity, and probity in the matter of use of scarce resource and professional knowledge. To enable a civil servant to pronounce a proper decision which would stand the test of scrutiny. You see, whatever decisions we take, ultimately, you're not the ultimate authority. You see, the fact is, whatever decisions are taken are subject to some kind of scrutiny, either by your immediate superior authority or by the public. In other words, you are under the glare. So, therefore, even just you might know that judiciary today play an active role, what is called judicial activism. So therefore, any faults, any mistakes, willful omissions, I would say, on the part of civil servants' discharge of duties might attract, judicial intervention. So all this must be kept in mind and while answering your questions. But remember that if the value systems are integrated and if the judgment is made on the basis of the value system, chances are that you will not only get approbation, but also you will invite least intervention from all sources, including judiciary. Because partial adoption of the value system is not at all helpful, and it could land a civil servant in disciplinary proceedings. There are many, many cases of otherwise efficient officials getting into trouble because of some serious lapse in one area. If it is a willful omission, it is all the more disastrous. Therefore, it is the value system that should protect from adopting any course that might be termed as willful omission. Willful omission attracts disciplinary proceedings, etc., even judicial intervention. The point to note is that civil service value systems are geared to promote democracy that regards all taxpayers as equal. Now, I have been harping on this point again and again, that taxpayers' rights, or rather assertion of the taxpayers' rights, is the foundation of democracy and the modern state, and that must be respected. Seen from this perspective, justice, fair play, and integrity are not just great qualities to be cultivated. These are what we call QR, qualification requirements. These are not something extra, but these are basic QR for a job in the higher civil service. Absence of any of these qualities, even in small measures, would be seen by the public as evidence of lack of integrity. I've seen in my career that a substantive loss could be disastrous. I remember the case of an officer who was deeply interested in development matters, but he ignored law and order problems. In the Code of Criminal Procedure, if you see under section 29, section 30, 31, 32, 33, just give a look. You will see the responsibilities assigned to the executive magistrate. Also, if you go back to the CRPC, just look at one thing. Do you know the Hindi expression, 10 numburi? आपने सुना कभी? 10 numburi? वो 10 numburi hai. What does it mean? 10 numburi means is a person who has been taken up under section 110 of the CRPC. This is one of the oldest provisions, from 1861. Under section 6, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110. These are the provisions which deal with keeping peace in an area. Relating to keeping peace. What does 110, 10 number का क्या मतलब है? A magistrate has the power to form opinions about activities of certain persons. Whole population. You have to keep your eyes and ears open and see. And if in your considered view, on the basis of the report of the police or otherwise is very important. It need not be a police report. It could be from other sources. If he is convinced that so-and-so person is of such character and his activities are of such nature that he might pose a threat to the peace and tranquility of the area. Therefore, in exercise of powers under 110, the magistrate can serve a notice upon him under section 110 to show cause why he should not be called upon to execute a security and deposit a certain amount of money and give a guarantee, an undertaking, not really guarantee is not the word, and give an undertaking in writing on a judicial, stamp paper that he shall not indulge in any such activity that might disturb the peace and tranquility of the area. And this, he will say that a certain period of time. This period of time is usually 1 year, but it can be extended. If the magistrate is so convinced that his activities during the last 1 year, while showing some improvement, there leaves still some scope for him to do some mischief in the coming year. So it can be renewed from year to year. Now this power was one single section that enabled the British to rule India without use of force. Because if the magistrate serves a notice on a person under 110, he loses his prestige. He becomes a 10 numburi. He may be otherwise rich, but वो है ना वो 10 numburi बन गया. Now, this threat was extremely useful. Now there are also in this particular section, you see, enormous powers. What I'm trying to say is that look at the power that is civil service officer exercises over the citizens. It can be used with remarkable kind of effect. And this is one provision that enabled government to maintain peace without having to arrest people. Because if this is enough, he will be marked. Okay? So what I'm trying to say, in exercise of these powers, even if you make mistakes, you see, if you make mistakes, this will be noted. Coming back to the story, the officer did not take much interest in law and order. So his superior officer, boss, came and told him, look here, you are the SDO. You are not a BDO. Please understand, you are not a block development officer. You have all the enthusiasm to go for development, during IAS interview, you might have said that I want to join IAS because I want to serve the people, I want to return whatever I got from the society. This blah blah is not going to make any sense. If you neglect your substantive duty, you might excel as a BDO, as a development officer. But if you fail in maintenance of law and order, I'll drop proceedings against you. So this is your last chance. I warn you. Now, play ball if you want to remain in this system. Now, this is the message that goes, that absence of any of these qualities, even in small measure, would be seen by the public as evidence of lack of capacity, lack of adequate value systems, and lack of concern for public interest. Now, there is what you call a substantive part of administration. So that must not be neglected. So while I mention that you must try to develop your core competence, it must not be at the cost of your substantive duties, right? Therefore, while answering questions, the candidates must avoid the solution that smacks of a tendency to compromise, some kind of opportunism, which is always selfish in nature, or to shirk responsibility. Because leadership is a quality that the UPSC would always look for in a civil service aspirant, right? It would also look for an ability to deal with complex and interrelated issues. In other words, you have to be a person, a potential generalist who does not feel ill at ease with any subject, because your intellectual tools are essentially a mental framework attuned to identify core administrative issues affecting the public interest in matters as diverse from each other as rural electrification and space program of ISRO, dairy development and higher education. These are at poles apart. Rural electrification and ISRO, or atomic energy, and composting, biofertilizers, okay, promotion of biofertilizers and non-renewable sources of energy, maybe at poles apart, but there is a relationship, you see. So that is what we'll be looking for. Then, what is needed while answering this question? A clear understanding of public policy. Take, for instance, there is a question here I saw about this environment development debate. Okay? There are always some questions relating to environment. Now, rote learning would suggest a reply, yes, development should be there. There should be harmony between this and that. This would not be liked. Would like to give reasons for your opinion. Why do you think environmental issues are not so important? Suppose you say development is important. Now, there is a conflict between forest and environment sometimes. The answer would be, after all, only 4% of India's geographical area is under forests. Why must you have only industrial projects, infrastructural projects that lead to reduction of forest areas? So it's a kind of inquisitive spirit, a spirit of inquiry and willingness to think yourself. Your own opinion is what is important. You are not to reproduce what is being talked about or what is being parodied about. The concept of social cohesion we discussed earlier, the concept of asabiya, that Ibn Khaldun developed in Tunisia in the 15th century, and that spread to Europe and led to the concept of nation state. Cohesion is based on something, some commonality, language, religion, or whatever, maybe geography, common heritage. So, while answering these questions, we should keep in mind that essentially development is all about social integration based on a system of ethics and values which enabled India to emerge as a nation despite our huge diversities and differences. So this concept of building up social capital and social cohesion has to be reflected in your assessment, your replies to various issues raised. Now, why I'm saying all this? Because usually the questions are in the format of a dilemma or options. So your choice of option and is not enough, but you have to give reasons for the option, and in a short and crisp manner. It is possible to give such a response only if you have an integrated ethical and social criteria. The idea is to test the candidate's capacity to form a judgment and the manner of articulating the same, as this will indicate the candidate's character and value system, and therefore aptitude for the civil service. Okay? Now, what do you mean by aptitude? The word aptitude means talent, ability, and in specified areas. In civil service, it is my personal view, it gets translated into a set of qualities that would approximate those of the statesman. Because the work that the members of the civil service do at various levels, especially at the higher levels, involve participation in policy making exercise based on evaluation and with a vision for the future. This perception that civil servants have to only give advice and the decision will be taken by the ministers is, I feel, somewhat inadequate. It doesn't reflect the reality. I mentioned about Sir C.P. Srivastava, who was Joint Secretary to the Prime Minister when Lal Bahadur Shastri was Prime Minister. It is not known that he played a very important part in the decision-making system at that point of time. P.N. Huxer, Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister during Mrs. Gandhi's time, was the architect of many of the path-breaking decisions that Mrs. Gandhi took. I have recently read a book about P.N. Huxer's role in initiating bank nationalization. He worked day and night and called the officers and prepared the ordinance, etc. The cabinet took roughly half an hour to decide on the matter. There are volumes of papers. The cabinet took a decision under Mrs. Gandhi's guidance. But I would not say that he had merely given the advice. Mr. P.N. Huxer and the officers involved in the Ministry of Finance, they played a very important role. And the Governor RBI at that time, in essentially preparing a strategic roadmap for nationalization of the banks. So these duties that P.N. Huxer performed during Indo-Bangladesh, during Bangladesh conflict, and the role he played at Shimla conference, for example. You see, these are works of statesmen like. For instance, while drafting of Shimla agreement, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was a clever customer. So he was trying to wriggle out any commitment about Kashmir. He was being hard and soft, a clever person. So he's saying that if I agree to this, I will not go back. I will not be able to show my face to my people. So you should also help me to survive. These are very sweet words. But what ultimately India succeeded in obtaining conversion of ceasefire line into line of control, which gave it a sanctity. Now, this was a great, I should say, diplomatic triumph. It is the first step towards solution of the Kashmir problem. As I mentioned to you, that the successful diplomacy nowadays is not about solving problems. It is about managing the problems. So, the roles played by the civil servants, even today in all spheres, are not just what you call supportive. No, these are basic and substantive. So, participation in this kind of policy-making exercise is always based on a very clear assessment of the situation, evaluation of the present, system, and then recommending a set of reforms. If you see these facts which led to bank nationalization, you would come to this conclusion that while the political executive took a decision, the civil servants prepared the ground. And this kind of work is not just like supporting. Let me just digress a little. What is meant by supportive function? Winston Churchill divided the officer class, top brass, into 3 categories of men. First category, intelligent and hardworking. You know about this, about what Churchill said, any of you? It's a very well-known kind of analysis, and brilliant and witty. He said that intelligent and hardworking, they make excellent staff officer, chief of staff, intelligent and hardworking. Second category is stupid and hardworking. See, stupid and hardworking. These people are extremely important. They are the foot soldiers, of any system. Third group is lazy and intelligent. They are the people who are the thinkers, the people who lead, people who dream, the people who build empires and destroy empires also. See, Napoleon is one example he had in mind when he talked about this category. So, in the civil service, my experience has been, it is this third category. They really develop the statesman-like qualities. And they are the people who call the shots. So, while you answer these questions of ethics, you should bear in mind this reality, that if you get bogged down into routine work too much, it might not be possible for you to develop a broader horizon, which is absolutely essential for reaching high. So, the core issue is what I would like to address, is why has the civil service been so very important in the modern state? You see, people talk about Naukarशाही, ye jo hai, but you cannot have a modern state without a strong, efficient, dedicated, and civil service. Now, I gave the case of Subhash Chandra Bose, who resigned from the ICS after securing 4th place in the ICS examination. Defined the British rule in India and foreign rule as in general, as one that denied top, I quote, administrative posts to the ruled. In other words, that closed doors to top posts, strategic posts, the administrative posts, to the ruled. These are close preserve of the ruling class and the ruling elite. It was so during the British time, it was so during the Mughal times. And it would be always so, everywhere, anytime. as these posts, which are central to strategic core of the decision-making system, would be necessarily with those who rule. They would not like to share this knowledge and expertise with others. The civil servants who are recommended for appointment by the UPSC will hold some of these administrative posts. It is not that it is a generic term, applies to every civil servant. No, only those who get into the civil service on recommendation of the Union Public Service Commission, they will be occupying these posts by virtue of their induction to what I would say the administrative class. You know, in British civil service, there is a subtle distinction. The administrative class is the class that is trained to hold posts of strategic importance. I was going through Churchill's wire memoirs, volumes. Sir Henry Cadogan was cabinet secretary during all these years. He did not write any memoirs. But Churchill admitted that most of the policy papers were really dictated by Sir Henry Cadogan. And he had the habit of maintaining a low profile. After the war was over, Churchill offered him Governor Generalship of Canada, Australia. Sir Henry said, "Thank you very much, sir, but I have better things to do." So Churchill puffed his cigar and said, "Would you please take me into confidence and tell me what those better things were?" Sir Henry said, they were in first name terms. He said, "Winston, fishing, for example, is one, and tennis. These are the two things. Third is that I'd like to spend more time with my family. And I'll see you when you play tennis next time." So this is the culture that is central to civil service, that some kind of abhorrence of publicity. Maintain a low profile, but play a big role. P.N. Huxer has not written any memoirs. Lesser mortals have flooded the country with their books and their works, because P.N. Huxer did not require that. You see? So I come to this last point, that persons of the administrative class, it has come out unconsciously, they are integral to the governance structure of the country. Therefore, I say, they are not faceless babus. They never were. Thank you. If you have any question, you might ask me before I proceed to some of the questions that I see in the UPSC papers. Any question on this? Yeah.
Social cohesion. So, in stratified society like India, even the social cohesion will be stratified, because it has to go first horizontal and then vertical to bring out a complete whole. The chances that every decision, even by the state, will be promoting that particular phenomena is I don't know how far it will go.
You see, the entire effort of development in India has been to build up social cohesion.
Like for example, positive discrimination. Positive discrimination I could take, like reservation policy. So like the intent is to bring that marginalized on an equal playing field, and hence to promote a equal society. But the thing is that it indirectly places the other party at a disadvantage. And today it has become a major dividing criteria also. Like as we can see in Gujarat, that Patel is still. So like how far this thing will go?
You see,
serving the purpose.
Well, it is equality is a long-term object. It will take many, many years to achieve that. What is being attempted by positive discrimination in several countries, including United States, see, is to reduce the gap. That is the idea, is to reduce the gap by an active positive discrimination policy. The idea is to reduce the gap, and it is hoped that as these gaps get reduced, the sharp edges of differences will be somewhat reduced. And this is a road towards social cohesion. An emergence of a different set of values and social practices. I find in Delhi, for example, it's an interesting thing over the last 30 years. When you pick up a phone, earlier people used to give their surnames. It was very common. मैं सक्सेना बोल रहा हूँ. These days, when I get called from numerous calls you get, मैं रिया बोल रही हूँ, but not रिया something. मैं ये बोल रहा हूँ, मैं सुबीन बोल रहा हूँ, मैं वो बोल रहा हूँ. They don't give the surnames. So this is something, I should say, positive development. People don't indicate कि मैं तिवारी जी हूँ, कि त्रिवेदी जी हूँ. Immediately he will say, Pandit ji, how are you? So that's not done. So the culture is gradually changing. I can give another example from our Bengali society. You are aware of the concept of Bhadralok? Have you heard of this term? Bhadralok? No? Bhadralok means gentle people. People who are Bhadralok. The term Bhadralok was first used in what is called Rowlatt Report. You know about Rowlatt Report? Do you know the title of this report? But who was Rowlatt? You don't know. You see, because in the CBSE textbooks, certain facts were deliberately omitted, just to give an impression that the Indian freedom movement started from Gandhiji. Gandhiji came into prominence by leading the movement against Rowlatt Bill and the Rowlatt Act. But it is amazing. I have interviewed many persons for posts of professors at various universities as representative of the chancellor, which normally when you're in government, you represent the chancellor in various committees. And at a young age, you get the chance to interview people much older than you. So I asked one of these aspirants with pretty impressive degrees, who was Rowlatt? He could not answer. Then I said, what was Rowlatt report about? He gave a wishy-washy reply. So, do you know the title of this report? He doesn't know. Let me just tell you. Title of the report is Report of the Sedition Committee, 1917. And Sir James Rowlatt was a judge of a British Court of Justice in England. And the report contains the activities of revolutionaries in India. And that these activities posed a great threat to British rule in India. The concept of Bhadralok, the word in English was first used in Rowlatt Report. It was actually drafted by William Hodges, ICS, who was member secretary. In all these committees, it is usually the member secretary who drafts. Others provide philosophical and moral guidance. The ultimate drafting of the report is left to the secretary. Bill Hodge was a brilliant scholar of Oxford. And if not for anything, it should be read for the excellent English that you see there. Brilliant English. Hodge defined the Bhadralok of Bengali society as those who are educated and have cultivated Western values and approximate to the definition of WOG. You know the definition of WOG? No. In the olden days, WOG was a slang used by the Brits and Anglo-Indians to describe Westernized Oriental gentlemen. WOG. Even now in England and Australia, this is widely used. when they come to deal with us, they use this term, walk. Now, the definition of the Bhadralok is a secular definition. Now, anybody, regardless of his caste or whatever, creed, if he attains the qualities of, say, a Bhadralok, which means education, interest in arts, sports, games, having literary sensibility, a scientific outlook, and a little disdain for money. That is very important. It's a part of Protestant ethic. Now, if I have seen that the caste differences are somewhat absent in West Bengal, partly because of the emergence of the concept of Bhadralok, and persons who do not belong to the upper caste. Initially, the Bhadralok was confined to 3 upper castes, but those from the lower caste who have attained the qualities of and attributes of Bhadralok, they have been co-opted, and there has been no problem whatsoever. So the purpose of positive discrimination is to narrow the gaps in education, in social attainments, by enabling them to access to higher posts. You see, what was not mere just a social gap, but other gaps will get reduced. Consequently, a new concept of behavior and identity, a new identity will emerge. So what we are trying to do is to create a secular, modern Indian identity that does not seek its sustenance from area, caste, or language. So what I see is a positive development that this is emerging. And this is basically the essence of nationhood. A divisive nation, a nation divided, cannot be strong. Therefore, the concept of social cohesion has to be at the back of your mind when you address any social or economic issue. Okay? Any other point?
Can you detail a bit on aptitude?
Pardon?
Can you detail a bit on aptitude? What is it?
Yes. You see, aptitude is probably not the right word to be used, frankly. My own feeling is that this civil service aptitude test is borrowed from the Services Selection Board. Whether you have the aptitude for a military career, like that. For civil service, I would say the better expression would be essential mental equipments, your state of mind, your intellectual faculties, I would say, whether these are attuned to the goals of civil service. Suppose I have a deep caste prejudice. Suppose I have a communal prejudice, I have some of these, then it would be very difficult to rub off these things. So, a liberal mental outlook, a scientific outlook, a spirit of inquiry. In other words, I would say ability here should primarily refer to mental abilities, the qualities which conform to the civil service values. So ability means those qualities which conform to the civil service values. That constitutes aptitude. So aptitude is a sum total of those mental qualities which are essential to cultivate the civil service values and the value systems. That's all. Okay. Any other? Any question? No. So I will now ask you, since you have gone through all these question papers, is there anything that you would like to discuss? Any particular question? Yeah.
Public duty and public service. So, can we also say that like public duty, since it contains duty, so it is more about conformity to the norms which are being established, like departmental ways which have been prescribed to execute a particular task. Whereas service will essentially entail like assessing the impact for whatever it was intended. Like if I open a school and there should be teachers and kids should come, that is like my duty part. But whether the quality of that particular act being done and what the kids are being actually educated or not, that will come under service part.
You see, first let me clarify. Public duty is defined now under Prevention of Corruption Act. There's a definition of public duty. There's a legal definition. But legal definition of public duty has to be seen in the context of the Act, in the context of the PCA Act, and the objects of that particular Act to prevent corruption. Okay, but here when you talk about public duty, it is in a broader sense. Now, I would say the first public duty is to discharge your functions and duties assigned to you under the law in a judicious, fair, and transparent manner. This is the first article of public duty. Okay. To give an example, under CRPC, under section 144, you have the power to restrict movements of people. If you impose CRPC at the drop of the hat, you become a subject of ridicule. I give a funny example. There is a highly enterprising civil service officer of Assam government. He was an Assam civil service officer. He was appointed as a SDO in a remote area close to the forest of Arunachal Pradesh. The common problem was depredation of villages by the elephants. So these rogue elephants would swoop down. So this gentleman, he issued an order declaring 144 wherever the elephant goes. It is the most funny order. So when he was asked to explain that, why did you promulgate Article 144? Elephant is not posing a threat, it is not causing a breach of peace. He said, sir, how do you say? This elephant has caused a serious breach of peace and tranquility in this area. People are unable to move out. Therefore, the villagers are scared, and I have no means at my disposal to deal with the problem. The police force is unable to deal with it because they are equipped with lathi. And then he made an interesting statement that the lathi being the main instrument for enforcement law order, may I submit that lack of practice in the use of the lathi over a long period of time has somewhat rendered its effectiveness, lowered its effectiveness. So this is the situation. What do I do? My duty is to the citizens. So I am declaring 144 to advise the citizens not to come out. In fact, if you permit me, I would even impose a curfew. But it's difficult for me to enforce a curfew because nobody dare to go when these elephants are moving around. I think there's a lot of sense in it. Now, see, when you are applying the power, here's a case where the officer has applied his mind. He had in mind the safety of the women and children, school-going children. And he had no means to control the elephants. What he did ultimately, he called the forest departments, and forest departments mobilized some mahouts, who could somehow induce the elephants to go by offering them large quantities of bananas. We purchased to the open market quickly and get them, and the elephants ran away. But the point here, here's a case of an application of mind. And the government finally decided that his action was perfectly justified, given the situation and the situation on the ground and the resources that he had at his disposal. So, law is to be applied in situations keeping in view the exigencies of the situation. That you have to bear in mind. So, you are to be absolutely impartial, and while doing so, if you deviate, suppose on the other hand, you impose 144 unnecessarily. There is a procession going to be taken out, and you declare 144. Even though there is no possibility of a breach of peace. So the processionists, those who wanted to organize procession, feel that it was an overreaction, an act calculated to hurt our feelings. So better course would have been to discuss with the processionists and persuade them not to take out the procession, as it might cause breach of peace. So the point is that whatever powers you have must be applied in a just, fair, and transparent manner. And in such matters like law and order, it is necessary to maintain the contact with the people. You see, regular contact with the people to know their feelings. Therefore, the participation of the officials, civil service officials, in activities like education, health, etc., are important from a basic administrative point of view. It gives an idea of how people are really organize their activities. What are their feelings? What are their sentiments? What are their emotions? What are the issues which are, basically influencing their conduct? So the concept of a district officer, for example, is something, as I told you, it was almost 250 years ago, established by Warren Hastings. Lord Wavell was a Governor General. In his memoirs, I found, made one interesting comment. The British would be remembered, I quote, the British would be remembered not by this or that. British would be remembered not by this or that, but because of the institution of the district officer that it had left behind. That was unquote. That was what Wavell's assessment. My point here is that whatever may be the cadre you may be working, bear in mind this basic principle is that application of law must be done judiciously and in a fair and transparent manner. Okay? Now, would you please take the floor now and ask me something with reference to the question papers that you had read? Yeah.
Sir, one of the previous year question paper, so in that question they had said that there is a new recruit to the civil services. He's your friend, but of late he's been feeling very low on morale because the changes that he wanted to bring about in his working environment, all his efforts are getting stymied because of apathy from the lower level of officials, and also there is some sort of a collusion and corruption higher up in the hierarchy. So he is pretty distressed, and the question was, what advice as a friend would you give to him at this point in time? And he's like, he's worked very hard to get where he is, and he's like, pretty low on confidence and morale, everything. So in this case, what would be the advice that you should give to them? Like, what would be the appropriate?
Okay. Such views are usually impressionistic, in the sense that the position that a newly appointed officer would be holding was certainly at the operational level, not at the supervisory level. First advice would be that concentrate on your job and know your job, master rules and regulations. And when you talk about pressure from up and below, these are in general terms. The issue would be if you had taken a particular initiative which is obstructed or something like that, the reasons for that must be appreciated by you. And armed with your knowledge of law, you try to overcome it and see what happens. Do not foreclose the options. Do not reach a judgment which is premature in nature. Don't rush to a conclusion. Because this kind of attitude is usually a hangover of the college days. You know, a hangover of a feeling that once I land there, I'll stand up like Jesus Christ or a kind of great reformer. No, no way. You see, first, what is the specific work? Please, then answer will be, I would ask my friend to explain what difficulties he had encountered in taking a particular course of action, and what are the obstacles, and whether these obstacles could be removed by him by use of his powers, and then see the outcome, rather than reaching a kind of what you might call expression of negativism, you see, right from the beginning.
There is some sort of corrupt activities that are taking place, and it is in collusion with the higher ups. Your superiors are also involved, so that becomes a very sensitive issue.
See, most unlikely situation, because who is your superior? He is your own service superior, maybe 3-4 years senior to you. And this very assumption that the superior person has already been corrupted, this assumption also is questionable. Now, again I say that such views are sometimes, I found, impressionable, impressionistic, and in the early stage of one's career, one must try to understand the system. You see, for instance, if you are posted in any department, first try to understand the work, the environment of that area, rules, regulations, etc. Mastering those would take a lot of time. Then you embark on, you think of consequences of our action. These issues like, ये सब ठीक नहीं है, गड़बड़ है, वो etc. that you would hear. But what is your personal assessment and specificity? What is the specific matter that you initiated and which you could not get through? This is, I think, one approach I would recommend. Yes?
Sir, like, these sound very impressionable, but in the question, sir, we have that 2014.
2014,
the last year paper, question number 13.
Question number?
13.
3013.
So the Rameshwar success failure, is that the case? Question number 13.
Okay, good.
It's clearly mentioned that you have brought, it has been to your notice, you have brought this to your seniors' notice. And even they are telling you that you keep your eyes, mouth shut. That means there is something going on which is not legitimate. At that situation, like, it's not our assumption, there is something going on which is not correct. So at that point of time, what?
Now, the question is, the answers relate to the options. What are the options? Indicate various options that you think are available in this situation. How would you help him to evaluate these options? See, this preamble you read very carefully, but what are the options according to you available? How would you help him to evaluate these options? You see, first is you have to break down your replies in terms of options. Then you come to evaluation of these options. And then finally your advice. These are the 3 steps. What are the first steps? Say options. What according to you are the options?
So first, according to me, is like you try and use all the resources available. You try and exhaust all the attempts, internal attempts you have, like internal mechanism available with you. If those are not working out, then try and use discipline.
Okay. What is the second option?
Like, this is the first option. If that is not working, try and come out with what to say, dissent notes in either by whistleblowing or something other than that. And the third option would be quiet. Follow what is doing.
The first option is number one. Let's see. Can you put it down in writing here and just formulate the options, 3 options. The question is that, yeah, what are the various options? Okay. You have written?
So the first option would be follow your senior's advice. Whatever he's saying, like keep him out there. But that would be like unethical. It will demoralize you, will problem of dissonance and other. Then use internal mechanisms like bringing in new initiative and see how those worked out and see the reason for their failure or why are the other people not cooperating with you in trying to bring out the reforms. Then the third will be, if second is not successful, use other measures like going to a higher authority or bringing such malpractices to the notice of media or like try and act strictly within your framework and punish those who are like subordinate to you who are involved in malpractices and set out an example.
You see, the power of punishment, inflicting punishment, is laid down in the discipline and appeal rules. Whether your friend has the power to do so. Is he the appointing authority? You see, under the discipline and appeal rules, the proceedings for major penalty can be initiated only by the appointing authority, not by the disciplinary authority. You may be the boss, but you may not have the power to draw up disciplinary proceedings. Against gazetted officers, for example, the disciplinary proceedings can be drawn up only by the appointing authority, which is the governor of the state, which means secretary. Only secretary has the power to draw up proceedings against agriculture department officers in the state who are under state agriculture department or animal husbandry department. Okay? You see, is that the consensus? What is your option? What are the options?
You do not partake in those corrupt activities. You follow whatever your duties are as laid down by the law. And if you don't want to go to the media or if you don't want to be a whistleblower, you just don't partake in the corrupt activities and you follow the letter of the law and try to, lead by example. Probably your subordinates might try to realize that we have a superior who is doing things in public interest, so there can be a change of heart. I mean, it's probably too optimistic to expect that.
See, while thinking about this option, please don't go outside these sentences, outside what is written there. Please read it again. In such cases, I would say the first thing that you should do is to read it quickly, not once, but twice, and see between the lines. Between the lines, what is the intent in this whole paragraph? You see, your view, madam?
Just a different formulation of their options, try to take time and build a team of people who support your stand on the issue. You use your credibility, reputation and leadership qualities to induce legitimate pressure on the people obstructing your views by involving the support of the staff that you have. I mean that would be one of the options. That would be my final advice. The other two are stay quiet and follow is obvious, and in approaching the media or the whistleblower, you can evaluate each one of them, saying how they are not correct. And finally, do not be impatient and take some time to evaluate the situation and the specific obstructions being in the path of your action, and to use your credibility and reputation that you have built to have a team of people who support you on that issue so that you can induce legitimate pressure on the...
See, it takes time to build up reputation. Here, one gets an impression that he is a newly recruited officer. He might not have been able to build up a reputation for himself. He required time. Ramesh sir successfully cleared and Soon after joining the service, he realized that things are not as rosy as he'd imagined. First of all, if he had imagined a rosy situation before, there was something wrong with him. Something terribly wrong with him. Because he must have studied everything about corruption. He must have been watching the TV, reading newspapers, etc. So, also try to see that this is set, this particular event or occurrence, in a certain environment. What is that environment? An environment that is, despite its constraints and failures, trying to improve the degree of accountability of the civil service to the people. Make no mistake, from 1980s, when the civil society movement in India gained strength, and the international pressures also have been mounting, that we must have a transparent, efficient system of public service delivery. The Right to Information Act was a state to this direction. So any citizen, I'm sure citizens must have noticed this. So RTI is an instrument for extracting information and put it in the public domain. You have cases of social activism. You have opposition parties' activism. Take the issue of dal. The opposition is crying hoarse that the government is sinking in the dal lake. One fellow told me, one of my ex-colleagues, he said the government seems to be sinking in dal lake, like that, all kind of things. But just look at it. In civil service, you have to go by the words, written words, very clearly. He found a number of malpractices prevailing in the department assigned to him. For example, funds under various schemes and grants being misappropriated. So the first issue is misappropriation of grants. Okay? Second issue is official facilities are frequently used for personal needs. That means misuse of vehicles, telephones, or other facilities. Third is a recruitment scam. He found that the whole process of recruitment is wrong. Okay? And then when he brought these matters to the notice, presumably orally, he was asked to keep his mouth shut. Now, what are the options available? One, as you said, go by the advice of your seniors, keep quiet. Which means you become a part of the system, part of the scam also, by not insisting on any remedial measure. Second option is you seek transfer, something like that, But a practical course, it is not clear from this statement, would have been to put it down in writing and bring it to the notice of the senior, which means ignore the advice. Ignore the advice, do some hard work, and study rules, regulations, etc., and bring it to the notice of your boss in writing. If he had not done it, this particular advice that keep your eyes and ears open, closed, would be there. As long as you don't have the courage to put it down in writing, you'd always get this kind of advice. So civil service ethics demands that you have the intellectual integrity, professional competence, and your moral responsibility to the people. If you feel disturbed by the fact that public money is being wasted, a lot of damage is being done, you should have the courage of conviction to put it down in writing in a cogent manner, not in a unclear manner, in a professional manner. You prepare a note that these are my observations, I have been detailed for duty, and these are my observations. And these are violative of the government instructions, government policies, rules, regulations, etc. And whatever is being done is not in the public interest. I think that public interest is not being served because of these malpractices, and it's necessary that we take major steps to rectify it.
You mentioned this seat transfer. I thought about it, but when you were giving the introduction, you said that try not to shirk responsibility.
Exactly, but we are answering a theoretical question. What are the options? You see, one option is to leave the service and join an NGO and try to save Ganga, remove pollution from Ganga, do something like that, which, which takes you away from the problematic civil service. Well, okay. You see, therefore, my point would be in all these, mere mentioning that, ye sab garbad chal raha hai, wo hai, that's not enough. You should have the professional competence, moral courage, intellectual integrity. You must have the due concern for public interest and faith in God, character, to be able to put up a strong case for ending these malpractices and the need to do so in the larger public interest, which as a civil servant you are required to serve efficiently, honestly, and competently. Yes?
So the question, 2 lines are dedicated to, elaborate the extent of corruption. So,
Is there anything like that?
Yeah, they are using, office utilities for personal use. Then they are,
You see,
exams.
okay, look, there are allegations, and there are many cases of misuse. When I was in the Defense Ministry, there are always allegations the army officers use the army's vehicles for taking their dogs for treatment, etc. There are various allegations. They falana Colonel Saab, unka kutte ko gaadi se leke ye treatment karwa. See, what do you do? Suppose these are the allegations. There may be similar allegations against civil service officers also. In fact, recently there was a very interesting case in West Bengal where a dog belonging to a VIP, a minister, developed some heart problem. So he was taken to a heart research hospital of the government, and the dog was put in the ICU, intensive care unit. Now you see, there is a supply-demand problem in the country. There are some heart patients who, because of this sudden entry of the dog in the ICU, they were denied admission into it. So their rights were violated. You see, you go by the Citizens' Charter. The hospital would be telling that heart patients who are in need of ICU must be given first priority. But why was this dog admitted to the ICU? The matter has not been resolved as yet to my knowledge, but I found it amusing. This is a case of misuse of power by a political executive to the detriment of the public interest. Public interest demands that dogs should go to the dogs hospital. They have no right to get treated there. Now there's a question is, there's a concern for animals' welfare. A very leading politician is heading an organization, concern for, there is a what is called Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. There's an international organization. Now the question is, here it's a clear case of misuse of power. I tell you, when you talk about the official facilities, there are clear rules about use of these facilities. So these are cases of violation of those rules. So it is necessary to say, put it down in writing that these are the cases, and the violation is facilitated by lack of proper maintenance of the logbook of the government vehicles. This is not being checked. Lack of maintenance of logbook for the telephones also. There are always rules relating to use of telephones. Of course, nowadays it can't be a problem because everybody is having mobile phone. These are old. Forget about telephones. As far as vehicles are concerned, there are rules. Now, this corruption is facilitated because of lack of proper supervision and lack of maintenance of the logbook. So, if suppose the officer concerned, in his report, he mentions that I have checked the logbook and I found that this is not being maintained. As a consequence, this is being done. It should be rectified. So, not only he should mention the lapses, but also mentions why these lapses, according to you, are taking place. One word, because of inadequate supervisory measures, inadequate supervision, and that facilitates corruption. Okay? Yes, you are saying something? So, as far as this is concerned, okay.
That, like, first of all, these are not allegations. These are observations by someone who is inside the system. That guy who cleared the field services. Second, these three dimensions, like first, fudging the job, second, misappropriation of funds, third, using of office utilities for personal purposes. They show the dimensions of corruption, basically. Essentially, in telling that the whole system, that nodal office, has developed a system of corruption of its own. As a result of which, any even getting it in writing or putting it up to my subordinates or to my superiors would only amount to mere procedural conformity, that I am trying to wash my hands. These two lines, particularly in my understanding, they entail for whistleblowing, because the corruption itself is not individual corruption, that one particular guy is wrong or doing wrong. The thing is that the whole office has developed a culture of corruption of its own. It needs to be treated separately and brought to light.
Well, you see, whistleblower must think ahead. He must think ahead. Here, the mind is in a state of uncertainty, dilemma. It's a case of a dilemma. He has not yet made up his mind to become a whistleblower. Whistleblowing would take place at the second stage, when he brings it to the notice, formally, in writing, and then if nothing happens, then it is the next stage. Okay? Yeah. But essentially, the first step would be to know the job, know the problem, know the matter, know the rules, regulations, etc., and state clearly why these wrong practices are taking place and what should be done to remove them, to improve. Now, when you make a submission to your boss indicating your positive approach, it is not negative approach. If you merely state the problems, it's not enough. As a civil servant, conscientious civil servant, competent civil servant, you have to point out that these can be removed if certain steps are taken. Now, your boss would be under moral obligation because he's from your own, tribe, so to say. He has gone through the same drill and all that, etc. He might have been converted to some other mode of thinking, but he's your own tribe. Remember, you are not a revolutionary, suddenly entering into the system. So, if after making these submission, the boss doesn't do anything, then the second stage option is that if this is not acted upon, then it could be a whistleblower. You may take it up with your still superior authority, bring it to the notice, and give a copy to the boss also for his kind information that I am sort of writing to the superior authority. So this is the course of action. Remember, as a civil servant, you have to operate within the system. We have to operate within the system. We are not outside the system. Okay? Any other question that you may have?
Whistleblowers, by definition, they will come from inside the system.
You see, whistleblowers definition is there in the Whistleblowers Act. In the Administrative Reforms Commission, there is a section dealing with whistleblowers. Kindly go through that portion in the ARC's report. In fact, because of this provision and the growing awareness about the need to combat corruption, we are seeing for the first time, which I did not see during my term in the government, a lot of whistleblowing activities. You see, it's good for the country, good for the system, Improvement must come from within. Please remember, you are a part of the system and you have to improve the system from within, not from outside. You are not there to sabotage the system. No, that's not going to help. So, again, I say it is professional competence. Suppose you prepare a report which will be read by others. You see, one thing about government work, everything is put down in writing. The problem is somebody else will read. It is not that, like Mahabharata, you have written something and it becomes gospel. No. Whatever you have written will be seen by somebody. There will be one single kind of bureaucratic word. Please examine. Suppose you give a reply on all this, it goes to your boss. Boss will say, please examine and put up. So it will be examined by 2-3 people, they'll go through it. And then it will be analyzed and placed before him. If suppose, now you see what is happening, then responsibility is shifted to somebody else. If whatever you stated is correct, that person who is examining it, he will have to take cognizance of it. He will be failing in his duty if he conceals these facts. Nahi sir, wo kuch nahi ho raha hai, sab kuch theek hai. You cannot so, because you have given cogent reasons. So he will put up to the boss. The boss then will think twice. Because once it is a part of the public record, whatever notings you make can be called upon by the RTI activist. You see, under a recent judgment of the CIC, the file notings are to be produced. Therefore, the man who is examining your report about these malpractices, he knows that whatever he writes, if his examination is not correct, exhaustive or authentic, this will be a public record. And this will be in the public domain someday. Then what would happen? So people would be extra careful. Then when it goes to your boss, he should be equally careful. Because he knows there is RTI. If he writes, I have examined and I found that the allegations are baseless, I have decided to warn the officer. Suppose the decision was wrong, then people will ask, you have not asked questions. And the higher authority will say that you have not applied your mind. Now you see, whatever you write and whatever you speak, whatever you speak is different. I remember, even at senior levels, when a very senior officer tells you, see, you don't seem to have applied your mind. What will you say? You will not get angry. I said, sir, thank you very much. I will apply my mind more vigorously. You'll be happy. He said, well, in that case, have a cup of coffee, and then let us settle it over. So one should not be unduly sensitive to such remarks. You should take it in his stride. So, but writing is different. So he will be under compulsion. You see, what I'm trying to say is that once you put it down, your bosses will be under compulsion, administrative compulsion, to give thought to your report and take a decision in the light of the rules and regulations. It is quite possible that your analysis is wrong. Quite possible. But everything must be on record. So this is the way to establish accountability, and that would be a good way to handle this kind of situation. Okay?
So in 2013 paper, question number 9.
2013 paper, I don't think I have before me. You have it? Can you show me? Which one? For the participation of everyone, please read this question and the options, you know. You just read the first part. Kya hai?
Public information officer has received an application under RTI Act having gathered information. The PIO disclosed that the information pertains to some of the decisions taken by him, which were found to be not altogether. There were other employees who also were party to these decisions. Disclosure of the information is likely to lead to a disciplinary action and with the possibility of punishment against him as well as the other colleagues. Non-disclosure or partly disclosure or camouflage disclosure of information will result in lesser punishment or no punishment. Who are party to the decision and take action as per their advice.
You see, this question has been framed to test your knowledge of the recommendations of the Administrative Reforms Commission, which, that part of the recommendations which deal with the actions taken by the government servants. See, it is not the question of being right or wrong. Whether it is a decision, whether the decision was bona fide or mala fide. This is the first question. Second, whether from this it follows, if it was mala fide, then the second part, that he is an honest and conscientious officer, etc., falls flat. Okay? If it is a bona fide decision taken on careful consideration of all facts and circumstances and the larger interest of the public in view, and if he is honest and conscientious, he should have no fear of this matter being made known to the public. In either case, he had no option. RTI is a law, and you are under legal compulsion to provide the information within a stipulated period, because the person concerned has paid some fees and it is his right to get the information. He cannot deny that. So this is one. Now, if that particular decision was so very wrong that it had caused undue gain to some and undue loss to some, in that case, again, if it leads to disciplinary action, there is nothing he could do about it. But he cannot prejudge. If the decision was bona fide, there may not be any action against him. Because ARC recommendations are very clear on this point, that bona fide decisions taken in good faith at that point of time cannot be called into question later on. If the outcome of the decision turns out to be different from what it was expected to produce. You get my point? So, there is no need for him to get so much scared or worked up on this matter. RTI queries will be always there. It is a part of what you call functioning of the government now. Every now and then there will be some character who will be filing an RTI. There are many RTI activists. You know? We have done a lot of good things. By the way, 2 days back, Indian Express carried a news item, newspaper analysis of what good the RTI activism had done. One thing which struck me very interesting, because I am aware of this practice, the MPs are allowed a certain amount of money to entertain personal staff. Long back, an MP had appointed his own son, his nephew, etc. All of them were shown as a part of his personal staff, so that the money remains within the family. So this is the outcome of the RTI activism. RTI wanted to know who are the personal staff appointed, what was the relationship of the MP with the personal staff. Okay. Now, in what way can you conceal that information? It is a malafide act. So it cannot be concealed. Even if you don't give, somebody will find out. Now, again, you will be under double jeopardy. One, for providing false information. You will attract prosecution. Is that the desirable object? If you conceal information, you will attract penal actions under the RTI Act. That must be borne in mind, right? So, best course would be in such an situation, and bring the matter to the notice, because under the rules of departments, if you want to provide any information under RTI, it has to be approved by the head of the office. You have no say. So you bring these facts to the notice and go by his order. Second option is you proceed on leave. It is not a solution of the problem. How long will you remain on leave? You have to come back at some stage or the other. And request for transfer of the application to another PIO. Why? Another... huh? Okay.
Conflict of interest may happen.
Okay, fine. But the real thing is that the PIO could weigh the consequences of disclosing information. See, in my case, this is a kind of overblowing a situation. It should be taken in its stride as a part of the game if the decision was bona fide. If it is a malafide decision, law will take its own course. There is no way you can escape that. Any other question you have in mind? ये डिस्कस कर लेंगे थोड़ा सा, जो क्वेश्चनर है आपने दिया, हाँ, योर्स ना, ये वाला आपका जो कागज है ये, which one? Not this. I have not given you back, no? यहाँ पर होगा. This is your question. No, this is mine. ये वाला 2013, no? हाँ, ये होगा आपका. You see, Mr. Amit Sekhar has circulated this paper. Have you got it? No. You see, he has, it's a questionnaire. There are about 8 questions here. I'll just quickly run through it and suggest some kind of a reply. The question is, should there be a national policy for eradication of corruption? What should such a policy enunciate? My answer is, there is no need. Corrupt practices are crimes under Indian Penal Code and Prevention of Corruption Act. Policies are not framed on crimes. There cannot be any policy on dacoity or theft or robbery. No. So there is no need for any policy, because the intents of the government, intents of the parliament are adequately reflected in the laws in terms of definition of crimes and penalties that such offences must attract. So there is no need for a policy on corruption. Is the definition of corruption as per Prevention of Corruption Act adequate? Is there any need to expand the definition in view of the United Nations Convention to which India is a signatory? Should corruption in private sector also get included in the definition? Answer to first question is yes. Answer to last question is that this is the recommendation of the Administrative Reforms Commission. Should India have a law similar to the US False Claims Act? It requires a lot of thinking. There are certain things which we have, which US doesn't have. For example, in the United States, you can't file a public interest litigation. No. US law does not permit a citizen to approach the court. No. There is no PIL. Secondly, the judges in US are elected. They are not appointed. They are elected. And once elected, they hold office for life till they seek retirement on their own. It is their option. So, it is a very different ball game. Is India over-regulated? Are there laws and rules which create a climate for which facilitates corruption? No. In India, issue is lack of adequate enforcement of law. Law enforcement is a problem. We discussed about cutting-edge level corruption. The question here is, shortages of goods and services lead to corruption. How can these shortages be eliminated? Answer is very simple. By improving the quality of shortage and by improving the quality of administration and removing shortages by expanding the services. For instance, the opening of roads to private buses has improved availability of transport service to the people, and we discussed these matters. Also, say the Tatkal scheme for passports has been quite effective, like this. So one has to innovate and to see how the problems could be solved even within the constraints. You can't overnight expand passport offices, but Passport Seva Kendra, for example, is a good initiative. It's an innovative measure to deal with the problems faced by the passport holders. Does the Constitution give undue protection to the civil servants? Is there a case to revisit Article 311? As a former civil servant, I would certainly oppose this. I would not agree. And in fact, ARC recommended its repeal. ARC recommended its repeal, but Government of India did not accept it. And I think quite wisely, because Article 311 provides the basic protection to the civil servant against arbitrary actions by the political bosses, which means basically the appointing authority. Appointing authority may be president, but it is powers of the presidents are exercisable through the officials. And mind you, political executive is responsible for execution of political power, executive power, and the president and the governor have to go by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So in the present environment, this article which only says that no person can be dismissed without going through a process of, inquiry proceedings. And then in case of Group A service officers, consultation with the UPSC is required. These are safeguards. You see, you have to think of the overall scheme, not in isolation. The overall scheme is that the civil servant is appointed by the government under orders of the president. The president is pleased to. President is always pleased, even when he imposes penalty on you, you know. So the president is pleased. And the All India Services rules and CCS rules provide a mechanism for disciplinary actions. Disciplinary authority is the appointing authority. Okay? And through the process of inquiry, when a report is finally submitted, the appointing authority doesn't have the unfettered power to act upon the report. The matter has to go to the UPSC, an autonomous body, a constitutional authority, for their opinion. And it has been a healthy practice in India that the executive had gone on the basis of the advice of the UPSC. This is a safeguard. The idea is that even if the inquiry is prejudiced, vitiated, suppose like that, but UPSC provides you a safety valve. UPSC in turn may consult law ministry if there is a legal point. So these are safeguards to enable the civil servants to function in a manner envisaged under these conduct rules, with efficiency, with integrity, with a certain amount of security. Without that, you won't be able to function. Now, therefore, in the basic structure of civil service, these safeguards are provided, right? So, under Article 3, therefore 301, Article 321 is a part of that structure. However, mind you, this article also allows dismissal of civil servants on grounds of security and on a decision recorded in writing that the charges are such, of such nature, that it is not prudent in the interest of, in the public interest, to conduct an inquiry into these charges. Just see this, look at this. That is, a person can be dismissed without going through the inquiry. But it has to be placed on record that it is not considered, desirable in the public interest to conduct an inquiry into the charges which are of such nature. They are so serious that it will not be in the public interest to go into these charges, because these will be matters of record. Now, there are some recent instances in Delhi where this provision was invoked and some police personnel were dismissed from service. You remember, in one case, a traffic policeman misbehaved with a lady for violating the traffic lights. You remember the case? She was riding on a scooter with a child, and the policeman sort of started hitting her, and he was immediately dismissed. So the appointing authority of this constable or whatever might be the Commissioner of Police. So the Commissioner of Police, being the appointing authority, has exercised his power under this particular provision. Okay? But I feel that this article therefore must remain, considering the fact that the civil servants are involved in very complex matters of decision making, and this provides a basic security to the civil service. Should controlling officers be held answerable for misdemeanors of their subordinates for not exercising proper supervision? They are always answerable. The answer is they are always answerable. Are new laws required, such as dealing with the wealth acquired through illegitimate means? Answer is yes. We have the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, then you have the provisions of the Income Tax Act, and government had introduced provisions for forfeiture of properties acquired by public servants illegally. and by adoption of corrupt practices. Should we have a code of conduct for the ministers? Very difficult. Very difficult because, you see, once you have a code, it is law. Law is meaningless unless there is an enforcement mechanism. Like this, there are several questions. Maybe you could circulate it and you can go through it. If there is any question, you might send a mail to him and I would respond. Any other issue? No? In that case, well, I would say thank you very much. And since this is the last session, isn't it? I wish you all the best. And I would request you to remember what I quoted on the first day from Sri Aurobindo. Were you there? You see, the decision to appear in what is the toughest examination in the world, perhaps, requires a lot of courage, a lot of moral strength, which you have. I could see from your faces. Therefore, I would like to compliment you for taking this bold decision, which means you have taken the call, responded to the call of the higher body. So therefore, I would again quote from Sri Aurobindo in Latinized English, when thou hast the call, when thou hast the call, care only to fulfill it. Rest is God's will and blessings, which men call luck, chance, or fortune. So what it says is that there's nothing like being lucky or this or that. It is your efforts. And it is also quite interesting that Shakespeare thought in these lines. In Julius Caesar, there's a fantastic passage, I quote, "There is a tide in the affairs of men." I repeat, there is a tide in the affairs of men, which, when at the flood, takes one to great fortune. There is a tide which, when at the flood, takes one to great fortune. Omitted all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. Onto this full sea are we afloat now, and we must serve it to achieve our ends. What it means, very clear, that there is a tide when it is on a high flood, it takes you to great fortunes and achievements. When omitted means when it doesn't take place, all your voyages get stuck in shallows and miseries. We are right now on this kind of a sea. We are floating on that sea. And it's time for us to serve this sea when the tide comes. Thank you. Thank you all. I wish you all the best in your endeavor.